I don't remember how I found it. One moment, I was browsing the shelves of an old bookstore, wedged between a ramen shop and a rundown laundromat. The next, I was holding it in my hands. A single, dust-covered manga volume with no title. The cover was worn, the colors faded, but the illustration was sharp. It depicted a boy in a high school uniform standing in the middle of a dimly lit street. His head was slightly turned, eyes wide, as if he had just noticed something terrifying behind him. The background was almost empty, just a few streetlights casting long shadows. There was no author listed, no publisher. I flipped through the pages. The art was eerily realistic, each panel meticulously drawn, but something about it felt off. The first pages were empty, but when I reached the middle, I saw something that made my breath hitch. It was me. Same uniform, same haircut, same hesitant expression as I stood in a familiar alleyway near my school. I flipped another page. The next panel showed me looking over my shoulder. In the distance, barely visible in the dim lighting, was a figure, too blurred to make out, but distinctly human. My fingers trembled as I turned to the next page. The panel was simple, just 3 words scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Turn around now." I looked up. The bookstore was empty. The air felt heavier, like the entire room was holding its breath. A nervous chuckle escaped my lips. Creepy marketing gimmick. I closed the book, shaking my head, and carried it to the register. The cashier, an old man with deep wrinkles and tired eyes, glanced at the manga in my hands. His expression changed instantly. His pupils shrank, and his face paled as if he had seen a ghost. "Where did you find this?" His voice was hoarse. Just on the shelf over there," I said, pointing. He stared at me, then at the book, then back at me. Without another word, he grabbed it from my hands and shoved it into a brown paper bag. "Take it," he muttered. "Just go." I opened my mouth to ask what the hell was going on, but something about his tone told me not to push it. I left the store, stepping into the cool night air. The streets were quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic. The whole thing had left a weird feeling in my stomach, but I shook it off. It's just a book. Or so I thought. Back in my room, I sat at my desk, the manga volume resting beside me. Curiosity gnawed at me. I had read horror manga before. Maybe this was some underground artist's attempt at an immersive experience. I flipped open the book again. My heart skipped a beat. The empty first pages were now filled with panels. The detailed drawings showed my walk home, the exact same route, down to the cracks in the pavement. But I didn't remember these being there before. I swallowed hard and kept reading. The next panel showed me standing at my front door, reaching for the handle. A chill crawled up my spine. I slowly turned my head to look at my door. It was slightly open. I froze. Did I leave it like that? With a deep breath, I pushed it fully open and peered inside. Nothing. My house was just as I had left it. I let out a shaky laugh. Getting paranoid over a book. Come on, man. Sitting back down, I turned the next page. My stomach dropped. The manga now depicted me sitting at my desk, holding the book, just like I was doing now. And, in the next panel, a dark figure stood behind me. My breath hitched. My skin prickled with cold sweat. Slowly, very slowly, I turned my head. Nothing. I exhaled, pressing a hand to my chest. This is just a mind game. A psychological horror thing. If I turn the page, it's probably going to make me see something. So I turned it. This panel was different. It was handwritten, crude, and rushed. "You should have listened." My vision blurred. A wave of nausea hit me. I blinked, and suddenly, I was back in the bookstore, standing right where I had been before. The manga was in my hands, closed, as if I had never opened it. The old man was staring at me, his expression unreadable. My breath came in short gasps. I looked around, same shelves, same dim lighting, same smell of aged paper. I turned the book over, flipping through its pages, empty, not a single drawing. What the hell just happened? I whispered. The old man sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. You saw, didn't you? I stared at him, unable to speak. His eyes darkened. You're in it now. A slow, sinking dread filled my chest. I turned toward the door, my hands trembling. Through the glass window, I could see the street outside, but something was wrong. The street lights were dim, the alleyways were darker than before, and in the distance, barely visible beneath the flickering glow, a shadowed figure stood perfectly still, waiting. And then the lights flickered, and the page turned, and the worst part, I didn't even know what the right ending was. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This was the third time I had woken up in this same spot, the same book in my hands, the same old man watching me with that knowing, exhausted look. You're starting to understand now, he said, his voice heavy. I swallowed, my throat dry. Understand what? That I'm trapped in some twisted manga death loop? He didn't deny it. My hands clenched around the book. There's no way to win, is there? The old man sighed. There is a way out, but you won't find it by repeating your mistakes. I gritted my teeth. And what were my mistakes? He didn't answer. I flipped the book open again. The pages were blank, just like the first time, but I knew they wouldn't stay that way. A minute passed. Then, as if ink were seeping into the paper from beneath the surface, the first panel appeared. It was me, sitting here, holding the book. Again. The next panel showed me walking outside. The one after that, I froze. The figure was already closer than before. A chill ran down my spine. Before, it had always been waiting at the end of the street, watching. This time, it was halfway down the road. My heart pounded in my ears. The loops weren't just repeating, they were escalating. I turned to the old man. What happens if I keep failing? His face darkened. You don't want to find out. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Fine. Then tell me what I'm supposed to do differently. He shook his head. That's for you to figure out. I felt like screaming, but I didn't have time for that. The book was open. The story was moving forward, and I had to move with it. I stepped outside. The world was wrong again. The sky was a deeper shade of blue, almost purple, the stars sharper and alien. The buildings looked stretched, like they had been pulled just a little too far upward. I flipped the page. This time, the book showed something different. Me, standing still, waiting. My breath hitched. Before, it had always told me to run, to follow the path. But now, I clenched my fists. I have to break the pattern. The street was empty, quiet. And then, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I squeezed the book tighter, my entire body tense. I didn't need to look. I already knew what was approaching, the figure. It had always been chasing me, but what if... I turned the page. The panel showed me turning around. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to, but I did. For the first time I faced it, and what I saw was me, or at least a version of me. The figure was my height, my build, but its skin was pitch black, as if made of ink. Its eyes were hollow, glowing white voids. Its mouth was stitched shut, and yet somehow I could hear it, a whisper, "Turn the page." I didn't move. The figure tilted its head. Its neck cracked unnaturally. "Turn the page." I glanced down at the book in my hands. The panel had changed. It now showed two choices. One page showed me running. Again, the other showed me giving the book to the figure. My pulse pounded. I had never been given a choice before. The book had always dictated my path, forcing me to obey. But now, I slowly extended the manga toward the figure. Its hollow eyes flickered. Then, with a slow, jerky movement, it reached out and grasped the book. Its fingers were too long, its grip cold and unsteady. The second it touched the book, the pages turned violently on their own, faster, faster, until they were nothing but a blur. And then the book slammed shut. A suffocating silence filled the street. The figure stood still, holding the book against its chest. And then it began to dissolve. The ink that made up its body dripped down like melting wax, seeping into the pavement. Its glowing eyes flickered once, twice, before vanishing completely. Within seconds it was gone, and the book with it. I exhaled shakily, my hands still trembling. Had I won? The street began to blur, twisting around me like a vortex of color and light. My vision darkened. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the bookstore. But something was different. The old man was gone. The store was empty, the air heavy with dust. Books lay scattered across the floor, their covers aged and tattered. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly, and on the counter, a single manga volume sat untouched. I hesitated, my stomach twisting into knots. The cover was blank. No title, no author. I swallowed hard. Slowly, I reached out and flipped the first page. There was no story, no panels, no drawings, just one sentence. "You have escaped." My breath caught in my throat. The page turned on its own. The second sentence appeared. "But others will not be so lucky." I slammed the book shut, my hands clammy. I wasn't the first person to be trapped in this story, and I wouldn't be the last. I stepped back, forcing my legs to move. I needed to leave. As I turned toward the door, something caught my eye. A young man, maybe my age, was standing at the entrance. His gaze was fixed on the book, drawn to it. His hand reached forward. I opened my mouth to warn him. But before I could speak, his fingers touched the cover. The book shuddered. And then I heard the faintest whisper. "Turn the page." By the way, if you want to see more scary stories like this, don't forget to show some love by hitting the like and sub button. It helps a lot. Until next time.